Hello viewers, 4DIYers here with another video for everyone. In this big video here I'll be showing you how to replace the upper intake gaskets on a BMW M57 diesel. This particular car I'm working with here today is a 2010 335D. With age and heat from the engine, these gaskets will dry out, become hard, and potentially leak. If leaking, they can cause issues on how the engine runs. I'm currently partnered with Turner Motorsport. They are a reputable BMW supplier that has been present in the BMW community for a number of years. With every sale from their website, using my link in the video description, I do get a bit of cutback to help keep my channel going. Links to all these parts used in the video will be included in the video description. Before we get started, it's a good idea to disconnect the battery. This requires a 10mm socket, which I have already done. Remove the 6 8mm screws holding down the cabin filter cover. Lift off that cabin filter cover then. Unclip the sensor for the hood. Pull out the side tabs and remove the outer covers by the hood shocks. Here's a close-up of removing that cover. Remove the 2 8mm screws on each side of the windshield cowl. There will be one on each side. If you haven't already, unclip the wire that goes across the engine bay under the plastic cowl trim just above the engine cover. Lift off that plastic cover and then pull it towards the front of the car. There will be a wire that also needs to be disconnected in order to fully remove this cover. Before going any further, it's always a good idea to vacuum up any debris which can potentially fall inside the engine. Using an E14 socket, remove the 2 bolts on each side of the strut towers for the strut brace. Remove the plastic cover at the center of the windshield cowl, then loosen the E18 bolt here. Don't remove it, as there's no need for it. The braces have slotted holes which slide under the bolt head. Then remove the strut brace for each side. Make note of their orientation as they only fit in one position. Remove the plastic protective cap for the power wire, then remove the 13mm nut. As mentioned earlier, you should have disconnected the battery so there's no chance of a short here. Remove the 7 5mm socket head bolts using a 3/8 drive ratchet. The engine cover comes off in 2 pieces. Once those fasteners are out, wipe around the oil fill cap location, then remove the filler cap. Lift out the first piece of the engine cover. Reinstall the oil cap immediately. Remove the 3 10mm bolts holding on the center section plastic trim panel at the firewall. There are 2 styles of fasteners here, make note of their locations. If you haven't already, pull out that rubber gasket, then lift out the cover. You may need to pull up on the windshield cowl to help with the movement. Then remove the back section of engine cover. This is a tight fit and will require some patience when removing. Make sure you don't damage the sound insulation underneath. Remove the 2 10mm bolts towards the back corners of the intake on the driver's side. There will be one for the engine oil dipstick bracket and another one for another bracket at the rear. Disconnect the electrical plug for the map sensor. Simply press on the tang and pull off. Disconnect the electrical connector on the rear behind the intake. Then disconnect the other one below the map sensor. Using cutters, remove the cable tie holding on the wiring harness. Use a standard screwdriver to gently pry off the electrical connector for the butterfly flap motor. Disconnect the wiring harness from the bracket. Disconnect the electrical connector on top of the assembly along with removing the harness from the wire retaining clip. Using a standard screwdriver, remove the gear clamp holding on the EGR pipe. Disconnect the electrical connector for the EGR valve. Using a 3/8 drive ratchet, remove the 10mm bolts holding on the top intake runners. These bolts cannot be fully removed as they snap into place on the intake. Now remove the 11mm nuts for the lower intake runners. You'll need a long magnet to retrieve the nuts, careful not to lose any. Disconnect the boost pipe going onto the throttle plate and the EGR assembly. Wiggle the intake back and forth to help break it free. Finally, remove the intake. Before getting into replacing the gaskets, it's a good idea to clean up as much carbon buildup as possible while the engine is apart. I used a dull-worn screwdriver to scrape out each of the intake runners. Do not use anything sharp as you can damage the intake runners. The carbon buildup is wiped up with a paper towel. Take your time with this. The old intake gaskets are removed using a small standard screwdriver. This intake was soaked in my own homemade hot bath setup to remove any carbon buildup. This is a common issue on these engines. If you are seeking more information on how to do that, I do have a video for that, so be sure to check it out. To remove the EGR and throttle plate assembly, first remove the one T25 fastener holding on the bracket. Next, using a 5mm Allen wrench, remove the 4 fasteners holding on the assembly to the intake. First remove 2 on the top, then flip the intake over to expose the 2 remaining ones. Finally, remove the assembly. This too was cleaned for carbon buildup. Those grooves are cleaned on the intake gaskets, and then the new intake gaskets are installed. As mentioned earlier, these are supplied by Turner Motorsport. The links for these gaskets will be included in the video description. The old gaskets were removed from the EGR assembly using a pick, and then the groove was cleaned using paper towel. The new gasket was then pushed into place. The EGR assembly is installed back into place along with that bracket on the top. Those 5mm bolts are tightened. After that top bracket with the T25 is installed back into place. The paper towel was removed from each of the intake runners. Here I'm using my bore scope from Tessalong to inspect each of the intake runners. I'm making sure no objects fell inside and that most of the carbon buildup is removed. A link to this bore scope will be included in the video description. The sealing surfaces for the intake gaskets on the engine are clean as well. Scotch-Brite can be used on the head. For the valve cover it's only plastic, so I used a light degreaser. The intake is then installed back onto the engine. The fasteners are threaded in by hand to ensure it is properly seated into place. The 10mm intake bolt specifications are 7 foot-pounds or 10 Nm. The 11mm intake nuts between the runners are torqued to 11 foot-pounds or 15 Nm. I would recommend running all the bolts in by hand first, snugging them up to make sure the intake is pulled down properly. Use a flashlight to make sure all the gaskets are properly seated and have not fell out. After that is reconnecting the electrical connectors on the rear of the intake. Reinstall the EGR pipe along with the gear clamp, then tighten. Reinstall the electrical plug for the butterfly flap. Plug in the connector for the EGR valve. Reinstall the other electrical connector and clip the wires back into place. Snap in that boost pipe at the front of the assembly. Reconnect the wire going across the engine bay using a 13mm socket. Then follow up by installing that protective plastic cap. Plug in the wire for the map sensor. The brackets for the dipstick at the rear of the intake are installed. The electrical connectors here are also plugged back in too. Before finalizing everything, I reconnected the battery and started the engine to ensure everything is working correctly. The rear section of the engine cover can be installed. The first 2 bolts for the engine cover are threaded in first. That cover under the cowl is installed along with the 3 10mm fasteners. Remember, there are 2 different thread types here. The rubber gaskets for the windshield cowl is pushed back into place. Install the front section of engine cover. Remove the oil cap, then Put the cover into place and reinstall that oil cap. Tighten down the fasteners for the cover. The large plastic cowl is then installed back into place. Make sure you are pulling those rubber tabs through on the back side at each corner. Snap the power wire back into place across the engine bay under the cowl. Install both fasteners for each side of the cover. Clip the wire back on top of the windshield cowl. Reinstall the cabin filter cover assembly along with its fasteners. Reinstall those strut braces. Slide them in under the bolt by the windshield, then fasten them into place at the strut towers. Which brace goes on top doesn't matter. Reinstall the plastic cap for that bolt by the windshield. Snap the plastic side covers back into place, and after that you're officially done. New videos released every week on my channel. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button. It's a huge help to me, and leave a comment below if you found this tutorial helpful. If you're not a subscriber, be sure to also hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching.